On September 29, 1789, President George Washington approved an act to recognize and adapt to the Constitution of the United States the establishment of the troops raised under the resolves of the United States in Congress assembled. The act made what was known previously as the Continental Army a legal national army of the United States, but the true roots of the U.S. Army go back much further. In the 17th and 18th century, Britain did not have the manpower to protect all her possessions. So for well over 100 years, the American colonies embraced the tradition of local militias. In theory, every able-bodied male landowner between the ages of 16 and 60 was required to join. They were also supposed to provide their own equipment. In reality, many couldn't afford to buy a musket, so sometimes musket, shot, and powder would be provided for them. These citizen soldiers usually received little training and would spend most of their time farming or tending to their families. Their main purpose was to be called into action for short periods of time when the local area was under threat. The very best militiamen could sometimes be formed into minute companies. Like the name suggests, they were a rapid response unit, usually composed of the youngest and most agile minutemen. They often received extra training and were provided their own equipment. There were also groups called associators. These were similar to the organized militia, except they were strictly volunteers. They were also not state-sanctioned, which led some to act more like loose-knit criminal gangs. During times of war in the colonies, the colonial governors and legislators would raise provincial troops. Unlike the militia, these were paid by the colonial governments and served full-time, though not for life, usually only a campaign season. Another difference was that provincial troops could be landless men, those who had little stake in society. In theory, most were volunteers, but some could also be drafted if their numbers were too low. While they were usually formed into units that were much the same as the British regulars, some were specialized light infantry troops, often referred to as Rangers. The current U.S. Army Rangers trace their roots back to these units. They were adept at fighting in the wooded and rocky landscapes of North America. The most famous of these was Rogers Rangers. For a century and a half, all of these served as home guard, regular troops, or specialized auxiliary alongside the British regulars. But that all changed on April 19, 1775, when British soldiers and colonial militia clashed at the Battle of Lexington and Concord. After the battle, the British retreated back to Boston. However, the militia, who were usually only called into action for short periods of time, did not disband immediately. Over 10,000 of them stationed themselves around Boston, putting the city under siege. However, keeping a militia on active duty away from their homes for months on end was not a feasible solution. The colonies needed something more permanent. On May 3rd, Dr. Joseph Warren, president of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress, wrote to the recently convened Second Continental Congress, imploring them of the necessity of an American army. The sanguinary zeal of the ministerial army to ruin and destroy the inhabitants of this colony, in the opinion of this Congress, hath rendered the establishment of an army indispensably necessary. With the greatest deference, we beg leave to suggest that a powerful army on the side of America hath been considered by this Congress as the only means left to stem the rapid progress of a tyrannical ministry. Without a force superior to our enemies, we must reasonably expect to become the victims of their relentless fury. There was a natural fear among the colonies of an army with unchecked authority evolving into a tyrannical force. This is why Massachusetts men like Joseph Warren and John Adams were adamant that any standing military should be under the direct authority of the Continental Congress. New Englanders argued that the struggle in Boston was not just a local affair, but the cause of America. But many members of the Continental Congress were hesitant to commit their colonies to war with Britain. Reconciliation with Britain and declaring independence were both under discussion. However, despite the apparent deadlock in Congress, they still agreed to aid the forces in Massachusetts and encouraged the other colonies to send support as well. But the deliberations would not take long. Realizing the necessity of a standing army and wanting to bring unity to the colonies, the Continental Congress created the Continental Army on June 14th. The next day, George Washington was named Commander-in-Chief. And though it wasn't officially established until 15 years later, this day is recognized as the birth of the United States Army.